Welcome back to the Galaxy channel, everybody. I'm here with Sonia, and we've got a very exciting video for all of you today. Lately, we've been covering podcasts, and today is a very exciting day because we are going to get into how to publish and promote your podcast. Let's go. All right, so we're just about ready to launch the podcast, Masha and the Dogs. And Masha, thank you so much for sharing your podcast journey with everybody here on YouTube. And for the benefit of everybody out there, I was wondering if you could just sum up everything that's gotten us to where we are right now.
Yeah, so we planned out the podcast. We got the cover designed for it. Thank you, Dante. We even recorded our first episode and then we edited it.
Nice, yeah, so we've got our first episode edited and we are finally ready to launch the podcast. And now that we're here at this stage, now that we're here at this stage, there are just a couple more details that I want to run through for you guys just to set you up well if you are planning to follow the advice in these videos and start a podcast. I want to make sure that we're giving you all of the tools. I mean, as far as I know, there's probably some things outside of that, but everything that I know about starting a podcast. So one of the big things about launching a podcast, it's very important that your first episode does well. And I think that this is something that you should be thinking about, but it's also something that you shouldn't be stressing about too much, right?
Right, because I think that unless you're a celebrity or you have a big following on social media or you're somehow otherwise very famous, your launch is probably not going to be explosive. So I don't think that you should really, you should have somewhat of a launch, but you shouldn't focus just solely on that.
Yeah, definitely. You want to set up a few things to get you ready for when you do launch, that you're able to promote your podcast and get some initial listeners. Some of the things that we did in advance of launching Masha's podcast, which we are going to do here in a few minutes. We got the social media stuff set up. She already had an Instagram account with a few hundred followers. And messaged a few people who she knows personally who are interested in dogs and stuff, and just let them know that the podcast is coming soon. I think that is a really important step. If you go and read articles online about launching a podcast, you're gonna see a whole bunch of other stuff, like you need to put together a news list and you need to have a bank of 3 or 4 episodes recorded already. To me, I mean, yeah, maybe that's good, especially if you're going for a very professional level. But yeah, what do you think, Mosh? Is it more important that you do that or more important that you just upload regularly?
I think it's definitely more important that you upload regularly and stay consistent and have really great quality content and build your listenership that way.
Yeah, for sure. Podcasting is a bit of a long game, guys. So you're probably not going to get, let's be honest, a whole bunch of people listening to your podcast right out of the gate. But if you are committed and you're uploading on a regular schedule, whether that's once a month, every 2 weeks, I highly recommend that you do it once a week if you can. But yeah, I agree with Masha here. I think that the launch is important, but it's more important that you plan ahead and you have a action plan for creating content on a regular basis, and don't get so caught up in the idea of launching your podcast that you never actually launch it in the first place.
Yeah, and one more point before I go. I promise I'll talk less. But if you...
It's okay, I talk a lot too.
But if you even listen to some interviews or whatever with the big podcasters, like My Favorite Murder or Last Podcast on the Left or Joe Rogan, I think they started and they were doing it because they were passionate about it. It was fun for them. It was something for them to do. But if you start out in the podcasting being this is going to make me into a really rich, famous person, it's probably not going to happen because it takes years to get to that level of success. And if you don't love it and if you're not passionate enough about it, you're not going to make it.
Nice. All right, so I think that we are just about ready to launch Masha's podcast. The way that we are going to do that is with a platform called Anchor, which is my personal favorite platform, basically to distribute your podcast. I find that it's very simple, intuitive, easy to use. So Masha's gonna go jump on the computer, open up Anchor, and publish her podcast. I hope that you guys are as excited as we are.
So now I'm gonna set up Anchor, which I already created an account, so I'm gonna show you how to do that, but it's really easy. You just follow the steps. Also, do you guys like the dog hair in my shirt? I hope you do. So we're gonna go to podcast setup. I'm gonna put in the name. And then for podcast description, I created one and saved it on my phone, so I'm just gonna type it from here. So I feel like that's pretty good. I might change it a little bit later to make it sound better, but I'm happy with what I have right now. Okay, podcast category. Let's see. Not business, comedy, it's not good. Education, not really. Oh, pets and animals. Under kids and family? That's disappointing. Okay, so now we're gonna upload my cover. Here we go. And you guys have already learned about how that came to be in a previous video. Update cover art. Now, I guess we are ready to distribute the podcast. I'm gonna say yes, distribute my podcast. And my podcast has been submitted for distribution, and they're gonna let me know when it becomes available on supported listening platforms. So, okay, thanks.
Dang, Anchor is working fast these days. Masha's podcast is already on Spotify. So now that we've launched the podcast, there's one more thing that I want to get into here, and that is how to promote and grow your podcast. So Masha, what are some ways that you're planning to promote your podcast now that we've finally launched?
I think the most obvious one is obviously social media. Mm-hmm. So you're gonna want to hit up, Instagram, Facebook. If you're on Twitter, do that.
Do that, Twitter.
Yeah, do that, Twitter. Tweet about it, whatever.
Tweet about it.
But I think the other one that people don't really think of as often, and depends on whether or not it's appropriate, but LinkedIn.
Okay, yeah, that can be a good place, yeah.
But then one thing that I think is really cool, and you want to think about even when you're coming up with your podcast, is cross promotion. Mm-hmm. So something that I'm hoping will help me is I'm going to have guests on the podcast basically for every episode, and I'm really hoping that they will also be excited that they're appearing on the podcast talking about their dog, and they're going to want to promote it on their social media as well. So the hope is that that will help the podcast get more listens.
Nice. Dang, this is going to be a short segment because those are the two exact things that I want to talk about. Yes, you can definitely market and promote your podcast on social media. That's a great place to do it. In most cases, you're probably not going to just literally take your whole podcast episode and upload it onto social media. A really good way is to put some clips. Tons of people are on Instagram and stuff like that all the time. I see Masha's on Instagram a lot. I have to admit, even I use Instagram. She's checking it. She's trying to check it right now. And of course, the other thing, cross promotion. That's probably one of the best ways to grow, is by having a whole bunch of guests come on your podcast. They are going to share that episode of the podcast, and they're also going to get you a whole bunch of new listeners. Chances are, if they are a content creator and they have an audience and they're coming on your podcast to talk about a similar topic, you'll be able to get a whole bunch of new listeners over to your podcast. So those are two really great strategies right there.
I think there's other things you can do too once you get a little bit bigger, but they're more time consuming and more complicated, like having a dedicated website for your podcast, then you post a blog post, and then you put your transcript, and then SEO, and then but that maybe I'm not doing that right now. I'm just trying to get this recorded and out into the world.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, a podcast is almost like a business in that respect. There's a lot of different things that you could do. But for now, I would just worry about getting some social media presence going for your podcast, posting some clips, some highlights and whatnot on there, and definitely inviting guests and just reaching out to people personally. Never forget the value of word of mouth. Like in this digital age, sometimes people undervalue, I think, the fact that you can just reach out to people, call them on the phone and be like, hey, I think you'd be interested in checking out my podcast, and you will see your podcast grow. So I hope that you've enjoyed our series on podcasts, and I hope that it has set you up well to start a podcast of your very own. Next month on the channel, we're going to be switching gears a little bit. We're not going to talk about podcasts anymore. We are going to be talking about social media for real estate agents, and I'm going to interview 4 different realtors on how they've used social media to propel their real estate career. So I'm really excited to get into that, and I hope that you'll all be back to join me on the Galaxy channel next week. See you then.